Hello, Ken Lane here, API Evangelist, here for another one of my API Evangelist conversations where I just sit down with folks who are doing interesting things with APIs in the space. So let's see who we got with us today. Hello there, who are you?
My name's Dale McCrory, and I'm experienced product manager doing APIs in the enterprise and SaaS world for a long time, and currently have a consulting company that I started up as well to kind of help others with their strategies and technology strategies, and so that's kind of what I've been doing this for over 20 years at this point, I think.
Yeah, you've been in the space as long as I have. We used to talk quite a bit back in the day, and then we've kind of followed each other over the years. And you're someone I trust that kind of gets the business aspect of this, not just from kind of enterprise leadership and enterprise product and business, but also startups. And you said you got your own consulting, so you kind of get I think the bigger picture of it. And let's start with the basics for your average enterprise business leader. Why do APIs? Why invest in APIs?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of times, if we're just talking about the enterprise space, before you get into like software as a service, that sort of thing, if you're normal, it's classical enterprise. A lot of your integrations historically have been going directly to databases. You might have developers who are used to doing it that way, and they've built a lot of integrations to databases. And over time, what happens is, not do you lose those developers, and you know, but you're also losing out on opportunities for business agility. So being able to actually use data in different places in a quicker way, and th- this is, and it's an aspect of how many people need to know about change as well. So there's a big change management aspect to APIs. It's probably one of the leading needs that you need as a business owner in the enterprise world or business manager is like, hey, how do I know that I didn't make a change in system X that impacted system Y? Especially when you get a number of teams working on a single problem, and you always get like, well, why didn't this team tell me about the change over here? You know what? Like, that's a great question. We should have done that. Someone says, well, if we had a good, really nice API around here, we could have actually made a non-breaking change. You never would have even known that we made that change. Right. That's a spot that a lot of enterprises are still in as their teams are trying to work together. Like sticking to an API first mentality limits risk. That's a big deal.
Yeah, it's my previous incarnation of this podcast that I was doing when working at Postman. Top two things I heard from the 150 plus people enterprises I talked to is one, we need governor APIs because we got so many APIs everywhere. But
Yeah.
two, we need to hire product managers and or train product managers to be more technical. So why do this business leadership need a API product manager? These things are just technical configurations, these APIs, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're technical configurations, but they have a life cycle, and that's the key thing. With APIs, the moment you introduce an API, so you solve the risk problem by introducing the API. So you got the risk problem solved, but now you've added this new thing that has a life cycle, has multiple versions. You have to live with it forever. So even as if your business needs change, this API needs to change in an orderly fashion, and it needs to be treated like a product, that has versions, that has a business problem that it's solving, that eventually might get deprecated if it's not solving the right business problem. And most classical product managers aren't able to really get their head wrapped around that. And there is direct revenue implications for it, depending on the types of integrations you're doing. An enterprise might be doing a strategic integration, right? So there's a difference between a strategic integration and an ecosystem. Right? A strategic integration is, I'm an enterprise corporation and I'm strategically going to integrate with one of my key suppliers. Right? That actually requires a fair level of thought. Isn't a UX problem, but it will be around forever as your business evolves and as your supplier's business evolves. You need to keep iterating those systems.
So you're kind of alluding to, I mean, I think a lot of people think there's kind of one type of API to rule them all here, that you're going to just make APIs publicly available and you're going to charge for access and you're going to publish those to a single portal and everyone comes and builds things. Is that not true? Is there other types of APIs that people should be thinking about?
That's a great question. That's a great question because typically when the first thing a product manager gets hit with APIs is just because their developers are building a single page application and they need REST APIs to connect to React or something like that. So there's a bunch of REST APIs that are built. They're using authentication tied to JWT or some front end mechanism. And, and then they're like, oh, we've got APIs. And then someone's like, okay, that's great. It's called an internal API, by the way. That's a private internal API. It's not designed for public consumption. But then someone's like, okay, we do need to do this strategic integration. Like, well, can we take that one that we built for the UI over there to kind of like use it for the strategic integration? The developers are like, no, it really wasn't designed for that. And then someone's like, well, how do we actually repurpose? I mean, the functionality is there. The contract kind of exists. The business process is really kludgy. It'd take like 8 API calls over here, but we really need an API that does like all that in like one API call. And then somebody needs to think that through and design that. Is that an architect, a product manager gets in there and says, well, I understand what needs to be in there, what doesn't. And that's really what um, at that particular stage, you're looking at before you get to ecosystems and trying to build all sorts of other external public stuff.
What about the business side? Like as a product manager, I mean, am I just charging access for all of these APIs, or like what's my revenue model look like? How do I capture that value?
Yeah. Um, I mean, traditionally, an API is introduced for the strategic integration, which is the first step in a partner ecosystem, right? Strategics are to your first step in a partner ecosystem, saying, "All right, my business, my sales team, my executives say we need to actually have this tight technology relationship with this other vendor." Okay, well, the API product manager says, "Okay, I see the business value of that tight relationship with this set or multiple one or many vendors." And we're going to build some APIs to make sure we can facilitate those integrations internally. And there's a direct business value there because now you have the sales and the marketing capacity. But when you get into enterprise sales, it's well, we have a lot of problems to solve, and we know we can't solve all these problems with just a couple strategic vendors, you know. And, we would really want to enable like any vendor to solve these problems on top of our platform. Now you switch from an application play to a platform play. And now you're talking about indirect revenue that your sales team is able to acquire new deals because they are able to talk about relationships and functionality that they weren't able to do when you were just playing in more of an application space, an application domain.
So this is more than technical. You gotta have domain experience and understand what's going on with the business and customers and really dial in your API design and process based upon that.
Yeah, because if your application or platform has 47 features, and you got 47 features, and someone says, well, we got to build an API, you have to determine which of those 47 features are the ones that drive value and ultimately are going to help sales, right? Because you can't like just say, okay, because you're not, no one's going to give you the time to build out an API for all 47. Um, and that's a business problem, right? What's important?
Yeah. Well, as I'm going around the enterprise, various enterprises, I'm really trying to one focus on the product problem, the kind of business, and get out of the kind of core tech realm. So I'm going to healthcare industry. I'm in finance where things don't change too fast, unless it's broken. And I get a lot of people who don't see the API, and they definitely don't see it as a product, and they're making an argument that, well, we have SDKs that abstract away a lot of those problems and a lot of things we're dealing with. We just give people SDKs. So help us understand, what's the relationship between an API and an SDK?
It's a great question. So API is typically built for a business purpose to solve a business problem in a specific way, but that API needs consumers in order to be successful. By itself, the API is just, you know, it's just like a piece of mail that hasn't been delivered yet. But the consumers are actually what drives value to that. And the SDKs make it easier for those consumers to add value to your organization. Um, the the but the SDKs themselves are only so good. If you wrap an SDK around a poor API, then you're not going to have many consumers either, right? That maybe the API hasn't exposed a couple key features. And I've seen this multiple times where there's an API strategy, but a couple of the key features aren't there. So no one's actually able to really use the API, even though the company invested like $100,000 in the whole strategy so far. You know? Um, so that's kind of the SDKs are the thing that makes it easy to use. Mm, for developers, it's called developer experience. Narrowing the relevant developer experience, and developer experience matters because you can get things done quicker. So
Yeah, I mean, you could be abstracting away the wrong things with your SDK without it being part of a larger experience strategy, understanding your consumers. Um, One last question for you though. What's in it in this for you? What keeps you coming back and working in the space?
yeah, I mean, I enjoy solving problems and recognizing that I'm a creator, I'm a builder, right? And the way that things get built proper way is when you have the right contracts and the right protect abstractions in place. And APIs are the primary mechanism for that. And it's also, there's a lot of creativity even in the world of APIs, depending on whether you're doing event driven or whether you're doing bulk APIs. And Salesforce is a really good example. If you look at Salesforce's APIs and all the variety of APIs that Salesforce has produced, they're actually solving different business problems for each of their API patterns. And that's really fascinating to me. That's fascinating to me. Again, not other people may not geek out about that stuff, but I'm like, I know why Salesforce introduced API because they were trying to solve that business problem. And that was the only pattern that could do it.
Yeah.
So it was, that's what keeps
Yeah.
me moving.
I'm a fan of looking through people's portals and reading their blog posts, looking at their resources, their endpoints, and how they separate the APIs from each other. And Salesforce is endless in the lessons there and how, because it's not just the technical details, it's the business details as well.
Right. Right.
Well, I appreciate coming by, Dale. This has been great. I love catching up with you, and appreciate you sharing the product and kind of the business lens of the space because I think we need to spend more time here.
I appreciate being on. Thank you.
All right. All right. Well, I love diving into the business alignment side of this. Definitely, it's one of the reasons I'm firing back up this podcast is to have more conversations with product managers. I'd like to bring Dale back and talk more about maybe the tooling that product managers use, more of those stories and arguments that we can make to business leadership to get them on board. But that'll have to wait until a later date. But until then, thanks everyone.